this is a topic that a lot of times monastics think that we know all about the meditation process, but it's not true. I mean, we're learning and developing and experiencing it just along with everybody else, and it's easy to get caught up in a busy life as a monastic, and have as much difficulty really finding enough time to do our practice as it is for other people. So that might be one of the advantages of being kind of busy suburban monks the way we are at Blue Lotus, because we have a lot more familiarity with the same demands that everybody else is facing. And I had raised 2 kids, and I was a single mom for most of the time they were growing up, and so that's one of the things I feel that has become a contribution I make to my monastic life. That was it's very significant, because a lot of people will say, well, you can relate to our problems because you've had them all yourself. So I think I can look back now and think all those years where I just felt like I couldn't keep up and I was always just treading water, that was part of my training. So part of a good thing about being where I am now. So I'm not an expert on the topic that I'm talking about, because the more I study, the more there is to study, and the more I practice, the more I need to keep practicing, because it just feels like one thing happens, and of course, if you're a meditator, everything is just something, you discover something else is always coming up for you. So I hope I can answer questions at the end, save your questions, but I'll be very honest with you if I can't answer your question. So if I haven't experienced it or know much about it, I'll let you know that. So what I wanted to talk about is working with our minds in our meditation practice. So I'd like to find out first, you don't have to answer, just raise your hands. I'd like to know how many of you consider yourself definitely meditators. Okay, that's probably a little bit more than half. And how many of you feel like you're pretty new, completely new to meditation? Okay, and you're curious enough about it though, or you love the Theosophical Society and their Thursday night talks, right? Okay. Is anybody else here for any other reason? That is so. How many of you do a Buddhist meditation as opposed to some other? Okay, and how many of you do another form of meditation that you don't think of? Okay, so I'll try to be clear about any terms I use. I'm not going to use a lot of Pali, I don't think. I'll get it wrong if I try too much. And also, if I use Pali words that people don't understand, it's pointless, right? So sometimes there are words that are very hard to define in English, and Pali is a language that the earliest teachings of the Buddha, when they were after 300 or 400 years written down, the language, it's a liturgical language, so it's not a spoken language, but it was first written in Pali. And in Mahayana Buddhism, they have the texts that they have are in Sanskrit. They're very similar. So in the teachings that I work with as a monastic are typically the earlier teachings, the very earlier ones when it's all teachings, hopefully, that are teachings from the Buddha, and then were memorized and chanted and carried down in an oral tradition until they were written down, which was probably 300 or 400 years after the Buddha. So what I'd like to talk about is part of what we call the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And mindfulness can be another word for the meditation practice. And the Buddha gave very specific instructions, and his instructions were different than other teachings of that time. They were the things that I think separated the Buddha from some of the other ascetic schools at the time. And so they're very specific. And some of them, when he begins to talk about what are called jhanas, or the absorptive states of meditation, as you get up higher and higher in terms of meditation concentration, those he spoke about differently than some of the other traditions. So for the Buddha, no matter what anyone was doing, no matter what your meditation was, it's basically the same. The instructions are very simple, and that form of meditation is what someone would practice for the rest of their life. And the quieter their mind became, and the more still their mental activity could become, then the more they got away from being directed by their thoughts. The more they could just become quiet and watch their thoughts come and go, and watch the rising and fall of everything. And we begin with the breath. That was the process, and basically you just keep sitting, and you begin by observing your breath, and you go through the stages of observing your body, and then observing your feelings, both your physical feelings and your, I guess what we'd call, can sometimes be included, your emotional feelings. And sometimes these things are written about one after the other, but they're usually happening all together. So we look at our bodies, we look at our feelings, and then we look at our consciousness or our mind. And then the final stage is looking at basically everything else, all phenomena, it's called mental formations. So it's looking at everything else that we have created, objects we've created in our mind. So it basically includes everything. So what I wanted to focus on was the thinking. The citta is the word for heart, and also the word for mind in Pali. So we're working with our thinking all the time. So there isn't a part of this progression in mindfulness practice that isn't actually connecting with the mind. Even when we're just observing ourselves, when we're scanning our body, when we're scanning our feelings. So we're working with our mind all the time, and we're working with the mental formations, which is sometimes called Dhamma, and it's all the phenomena of the world, all the data. It's like all the other data in our worlds. So we're using our minds there too. So typically when someone is taught Buddhist meditation, we begin with the breath, and we begin by getting into a posture that keeps our body comfortable and relaxed, but awake. So we lift our spines up and let that spine support the rest of our body. And we find a position. We may need to realign ourselves. We find a position. If we're sitting, the traditional posture is to be cross-legged on a cushion. And for Westerners, that becomes harder and harder. Usually, unless you're practicing yoga, it's more difficult. And sometimes we can do the cross-legged position, but it can be hard without some support under our hips to stay in that posture for a long time. And some yoga teachers even will say it's not a posture to stay in for a long time because it's hard to keep your back supporting you. And so a lot of us can sit on the floor for a while, but then we can move to a chair, or we can stand up and meditate standing up, or walking meditation. And a lot of teachers say walking meditation is the very best posture for working with the mind. And as we talk about this, I can see as we're walking, we have lots of those objects coming to us to observe. Our eyes are open, and in our meditation, in the Theravadan tradition, I think typically we meditate when we're sitting with our eyes closed. And so when you're walking, your eyes are open and you're encountering lots of objects to have your mind in relationship to. We'll talk about that. So the posture is, what's important about our posture is that we're awake. And it's even fine to meditate lying down. And it's tricky because our bodies will think that it's time to go to sleep. But especially if you have physical problems or a bad back or bad hips, there are great ways to lie on your back where you can be comfortable. And that's very important. So as long as you can stay awake, that may be the best posture for you. So if anybody wants to ask about that, I know some different postures when you're on your back that are good. So we can train ourselves to stay awake. But that adds another level of difficulty into your meditation. So we learn about posture. Now I'm talking just about meditation now. There's a whole backlog of things that we really need to learn and be learning when we start to meditate. And one of those is about living a wholesome life, living with sila, which means morality and ethical behavior. You know, we began that process ideally even before we start meditating. So it makes it easier to work with our mind, because if we're living a wholesome life, so we're not harming others, we're not telling untruths, we're not taking things that don't belong to us, we're not engaging in sexual misconduct, and we're not using drugs or alcohol that make our minds be unconscious or alter our state of consciousness. So that begins to kind of clean up our act. We start having, our minds become, I think, less restless, our minds become more relaxed because we're not thinking about the party, the wild and crazy party we just went to last night, we've got a hangover this morning, or we're not thinking about something we did to someone that really was harmful, and we're not filled with regrets for our behavior, and we're basically eliminating some of the issues that most of us just, it can be part of our life. So that comes as a foundation for our meditation. And you'll find, and I'm sure many of you have, if whatever your spiritual path is, or your religion, that's where our ethical behavior and morality comes from. So most of us have that as a basis in our lives. We may not think about it, but we have our own code of ethics that we follow. And so if we're following those and we're happy with the way we're following them, it gives us a lot more spaciousness in our minds, because our minds aren't filled with guilt about something or recrimination or anxiety. It just allows us to be more present and not be thinking about the future or the past. So this process, the whole process of meditation and calling it mindfulness, is about being present in the moment. And if we can do that, and at first it'll start out to be maybe a millisecond or a split second that we can find ourselves in the present moment. But most of the time we're planning, or we're looking back on the past, and we're thinking about the past, or planning for the future. So that time that we can be in the present moment is the most precious time we have. That's the time we're really living. The rest of the time we're not in our bodies. We're off doing other things. So in Buddhist meditation, staying in our bodies is very important because that's where we do all of our work. We don't have to get into an altered state of consciousness, or we are not learning to leave our bodies or transcend our bodies, but we work with staying in our body and seeing everything in our body that we need to be paying attention to and getting our lessons from. So now we've gone through all of our ethical behavior, and we're changing all that, and we're learning to meditate all at the same time usually. And Westerners, I think, all want to do it all right away, like in one weekend usually. So it takes a lot of patience because when you first begin to meditate, as many of you know, you don't know what to expect, but you have expectations, right? Or you probably wouldn't sit down the first time. So expectations are usually, my life is going to be better, or I'm going to be more relaxed, or I'm not going to feel this chronic pain I have, or I'm going to be able to sleep better. And those are all valuable reasons to begin meditation, but it's not an instant fix. Has anybody had an instant fix with anything? I'd really like to know. We'll talk about that later, but so usually you have to develop patience right off the bat, and that's to even sit for 15 minutes because we don't know what to expect, and then you're going to have a teacher who says, don't have any expectations. Let go of all expectations. So don't worry about a goal. Don't worry about the end result. And then that's frustrating for us because why would we do something if we're not going to graduate from it or, finish it so we know when to go on to the next whatever. So we learn to let go of our expectations. And that's not easy. The further you go with your meditation practice, the more you see, oh, I did have an expectation about something. These things come up to us along the way. So we may think that we've dropped our expectations or the demands we have on ourselves to be successful or to pick the right, maybe a lot of us have done many different forms of a spiritual practice or of meditation separate from any kind of spiritual practice. And we might jump from one to the other because we keep thinking maybe that one's better, or that's the right one, or that's the one that I should be doing. So we have to reach that point where we're ready to stop doing that for a while. And it works better if you just, whatever style or whatever meditation you're working with, that you stay with the same one for a while so you can see where it's going to take you. It doesn't mean you don't stay open to lots of different things, and you never want to have you never want to get trapped, and we all do, in a feeling of, well, my form of meditation is the best one, or mine is the only one, or mine is, I'm not going to say it out loud, but mine is better than yours, but maybe you'll figure that out someday. So we have to, part of the whole thing about meditation is we're seeing these things come up in us along the way, and we'll suddenly think, oh, I still did have, there's some kind of craving in here, right? I'm determined to be right. I'm determined to find the most perfect thing. And we find ourselves having to let go of things as we go along, which is good because that's what it's all about. So we get our posture worked out, and we sit. So we're grounded. So we sit. If we're sitting in a chair, we make sure our body is comfortable in the chair and our feet are on the floor. And we're not going to do it. So you can keep your feet any way you like. But you get your body in a position to be ready to be solid. You want to feel centered. And so feet on the floor and your back straight. And usually if you're in a chair, to keep it from becoming too comfortable, because then you begin to slouch and then you start hurting, it's good to kind of scoot up in your chair and sit so your back is not leaning against the chair. I love to lean my back against the chairs. But if you're sitting up straight, that's the main thing. And one of the reasons is, there are a lot of reasons people have. One may be just to keep energy flowing in your body better. You're not, if you're sitting like this, you're not going to be able to breathe very well, and it's going to start hurting. And if you're too slouched in your chair, same thing. So there'll be more pain and discomfort much sooner than you think. But if you're not used to sitting up straight, it's a surprise to learn that that's a more comfortable posture to have in a longer stretch of time. And then we began just by centering our attention on our breath. We usually use the breath as the focus of our attention because it's there and it's part of our body. And our breath is with us until we die. And so it's really, it's a life force for us. So it's very simple to have our focus be on our breath. And if we go through the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, the first thing that we're working with is our body. I'm just going to do it in order, but then we'll see how mixed up it is. So we begin to breathe, and we just pay attention to our breath. We just pay attention to how it feels to breathe, and we pay attention to maybe we can feel the air going over our upper lip. It's very subtle because unless you're wheezing, we sometimes don't feel our breath. So while we're being quiet and breathing, we try to find a spot where we can feel our breath. And that can be where we focus. And some people will find it easier to feel their stomach going up and down, the rise and fall of their tummy. And if there are actually schools that have separated and over arguments about what's the right spot to watch. So we don't have to do that. Either place is fine. So, and you can switch from one to the other and see which works easier for you. So that's the form of the rest of the meditation. So when we work with the body, though, when we're working with the body, in addition to just the breath, and the breath we're looking to see, was that a short breath? Was that a deeper breath? A longer breath? Does the in-breath match the out-breath? We're just observing what our body's doing. We're not controlling our breath. So we'll notice lots of variation, and it seems like how much more boring can that be? But if you settle down and get quiet, it's very peaceful. And you can just observe yourself breathing, which we never do, because we're usually busy thinking or moving or acting or, doing our work. So we don't sit and observe our breath. But then in the mindfulness of the body, in addition to our breath, we also, in this particular, the first foundation of mindfulness, we can observe things. There are some classic meditations. One is observing the organs of the body, observing the parts of the body. And I think the sutta talks about 32 parts of the body. And you can go through and just think about, your eyeballs and your heart and your liver and your spleen and your guts and, the liquids in your body. And so there's a meditation where you can do that observation of your body. And a part of the reason that meditation is done is to make you realize our body is just a bunch of kind of yucky stuff. But it's not, there's nothing in it that is permanent. There's nothing in it that lasts forever. everything is just, we could put a lump of liquids over here and a lump of gases over here, and we could just break it down into the elements, and that would be it. That's our whole body. There's nothing very special about it. And so it's a good meditation to do, to not think about, to kind of let go of some ego and to let go of an attachment to the form of the body, because that's not who we are. And there's another one that's, I don't know how many people do this one now, but I know at the temple we've had some beautiful walking meditations in cemeteries, but there's another meditation that people would do probably more in the back in the day, in the Buddha's day, where people would go, the monks would go and sit in the cremation grounds, and they'd sit and meditate overnight. And it would be, that meditation would be to help them. They're meditating on death. And so it was to get over an aversion to death and an attachment to the physical body. So they're depending on where it was or what century it was in, that could be a pretty creepy place. They're not like beautiful park-like cemeteries that we have today. So there could be a lot going on in those charnel grounds, as they call them. So that was another meditation on the body. Then I'm going to kind of go to get to the mind here. Then we go to the meditations on the feelings. And then what we're looking at, again, we're working with our breath, and that breath is anchoring us. Then we're looking at our senses, and we have our eyes, our hearing, our smelling, our taste, and touch. And in Buddhism, we talk about the mind as another sense organ. So we're looking at each one of those sense organs has its own consciousness, has its own little area of operation. So what we're doing is trying to look at everything coming into us through those sense consciousnesses and just observe them, not even label what we're picking up. So we're trying to listen to sound just as sound, not as a car honking its horns or a truck in gear trying to climb up a hill, or if we hear a bird singing, we try not to say, oh, it's a robin, or oh, and most of us like to label things. That's our human nature, right? We created these things, so we label things. So there are trees and plants and birds, and we've given everything a label. So when our senses pick up something, we want to identify it and put it in its category, which makes it more comfortable for us, right? It's not scary or it's not alien. We like to kind of have a place for everything and everything in its place. So that's what we do with our senses. If we taste something, we might want, if it's not like something we've ever tasted before, then we have to determine, do we like it or not? So we try to, oh, that tastes just like my grandmother's da-da-da. Or, oh, I had a souffle like that when I was in France last year. We immediately try to connect it to something in our past. But in this exercise, when we're working with taste, we're just trying to experience whatever it is. And we're trying not to evaluate it or criticize it or judge it. So that's one way we work with our feelings. And we do a body scan where we can go through our body and notice what we're feeling in the different parts of our body. And it's a good thing to do if you've been working at the computer or doing some kind of work where you're like concentrating a lot on one thing. Gardening would probably be a good place, or being at the computer or cleaning house, to suddenly do a scan through your body and see, where am I hurting? So do I have a lot of tension through my head? Is my forehead all tight and everything squeezed together? And are my eyes tired? And we feel a lot through our heads. I do if I'm sitting at a computer. And that's where if I sit too long, I'll feel everything tighten up. Or as we move down our body, we can check everything. And sometimes just by observing it and noticing where we're feeling pain or discomfort, we can let it go. We can just, sometimes I think of it as just breathe into that spot and let it go. But we're going through our body and trying to see what we're picking up on. And we'll come across old friends, like pain that we forget that we have, but that my right hip gets this when I'm tired, or when I've been in the garden too long, or my knees start to hurt. And we can notice that. But in that kind of a scan, we're just trying to see if we can be aware of everything, to be as aware as we can of our body and those feelings. So we're looking at physical feelings. And then we're looking at feelings of pleasure or of pain. So we work with the feelings when we're doing feeling scans. Then we're also working with pleasure, pain, and neutral, neither pleasure nor pain feelings, or no feeling. And I'm not going to get into that too much today, but that's also part of what we're scanning for. If we're feeling pleasure, do you know the three poisons in Buddhism? There are the three poisons that we talk about. And they're the three, pretty much the characteristics that we carry around with us, that we're always working with. But I always say the words wrong. We're either looking at what we call greed or desire or craving, clinging to, or it's anger and aversion, pushing away from things. So it includes. The greed is the things that we want to pull to us, the pleasure, and the aversion or the anger is everything we want to push away from us. And that's going on constantly in our bodies all the time, at every level through our body. And then the third one is ignorance. And ignorance is when we don't know the truth of something, when we don't know the true nature of things. And ignorance can also be, ignorance has a spectrum. Ignorance can be from a very base level of confusion. So I don't know what something feels like because I'm not being sensitive to it. I'm not paying enough attention, or I'm sleepy, or I'm restless. So I'm not really tuning in. I don't want to know. And if we go all the other form, that when that ignorance is transformed, it becomes equanimity. It's not ignorance, but the opposite of that ignorance of choosing not to know, or being kind of lazy or drowsy or sluggish or restless, so you don't know how you feel. I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know what I feel. That's really ignorance. But then when we get to the point where we have been able to really let go of the pleasure or pain, and we're at that neutral position, that neutral position is where we can either be ignorant, or we can move towards equanimity. Equanimity is that quality of complete balance. So we don't pull towards pleasure or pain, where we are balanced and right in the middle. But it's not out of ignorance, it's out of working with our minds and realizing that there's not that much difference. We've let go of not only expectations, but we've let go of viewpoints about things or strong opinions about things, or, we've let go of all these things that we've identified with most of our lives, the things that kind of make us who we are. So what we're working then with that greed and that anger or aversion and ignorance all the time. And so when we're working with our feelings, that's a good way, that's always a good arena to look at those things. We have preferences, which are fine, but when the preferences and our viewpoints begin to cut us off from being open and spacious and able to take in new information or new points of view, then it's not good. We're constricting ourselves. So the goal is to always notice where we're coming from, what our perspective is, and to realize that whatever we believe or whatever we hold on to is just because we're seeing it from our point of view. So it's just, this is because of everything I am, everything that I was conditioned to be, and everything that got me to right here, I have a certain, I can see something and have a certain take on it. But somebody else is looking at it, they have a completely different background, a completely different objective, a completely different point of view. No matter who they are, we may think that we think alike. But suddenly, when we see that difference in our opinions, I think in this last election, a lot of people lost good friends when suddenly somebody they thought was exactly like them in terms of how they thought, and they discovered that their best friend was not voting the way they were voting, and a lot of people have suffered a great deal because of that, and they're suffering not because of what happened. They're suffering because their expectations were, well, all the people who are like me, will vote like me, and if they don't, then they must not be as much like me as I thought. So that suffering is because we had we weren't realizing that our perspective is unique. It's made up of the combination of everything that makes us who we are. So people fought on Facebook, people fought, most meditation groups that I did it, Wisconsin, the fighting started years ago with the governor that we have now. And I was a teacher back before I was a monastic, so there was a lot of fighting going on even among teachers, not just trying to protect their unions and things. So we would have to announce at the beginning of a meditation group, we do not talk about politics here. We absolutely don't. So if anybody brings up anything about that, I'm sorry, but we can't talk about it in the group. And invariably it would come up. But the one group I have in Elkhorn, we made a serious promise to each other that would not come up. And it was so wonderful because after so much damage had been done with people and their friends and their family, that group, people would say, I love coming to this group because we're not talking about that. It's our one place where we can get away from it. And even their families were fighting, at Thanksgiving and holidays. So we need that. Our meditation is helping us begin to see that everything that we do comes from our own unique, all the conditions, causes and conditions that have come that make us into who we are, and they're not the same as other people. So one of the goals in meditation is to recognize our viewpoints and our preferences and our opinions, and realize that that's all they are. Opinions, preferences, viewpoints. They aren't gospel. They aren't the truth. They are just the way we have put our world together. So when we're looking, as we move from feelings and we're looking at the mind, our consciousness, our mind, that's what we begin to look at even more. But we needed that working with the body and working with the feelings to even understand some of that. So when we work with our mind, what we're doing is, when we're meditating, we're breathing, of course, it's the same breath. We begin by looking at the breath the same way. But then we began to, all along in meditation, we're trying to just not try to repress our thoughts, but to let our thoughts just flow through our mind without having to catch every single one and decide what we're going to do with it. And during the day, that's what we're doing most of the time. And if you're like me at all, I can get very easily distracted by one of those thoughts is going to call out louder than the others, and it's the one that's going to get me distracted. And that's a quality that the mind has that most people, you may not suffer from it as much as I do and did even more before, but it's a quality of the mind that will grasp at anything. It's like it'll grasp at anything shiny, and it'll decide that that's what's most important. So it gets it, and then that's where the mind goes. So what we're doing when we're working with our mind, we're trying to watch those thoughts go by, but see what they are. Just observe them, and not criticize our thoughts, not judge them, not say, oh, I'm thinking too much, I'm not a good meditator, my mind needs to be still. But we need to just watch that and perfectly okay with ourselves no matter how terrible our thoughts are. And so that's the first thing we have to do. That's again goes back to why those moral precepts in our life are very important, because if we're working with those all the time, just being a better person, being the person we want to be, we're not going to be going, oh my gosh, I have the worst thoughts in the world. We may not like our thoughts, or we may think, whoa, where did that come from? But we're always kind of purifying our minds. This whole process is purification of our mind all the way through. So things are looking better up in our minds, but we still have crazy, wild thoughts, and it's like, where did that thought come from? I was doing this with a group the other night, and one person said, I asked, how did people feel watching their thoughts that way? And he said, well, psychotic. And he said the thoughts were just coming from, I didn't even know where they were coming from. But that's what happens with our minds. It's like there are thoughts coming, from behind you and in front of you and slipping in underneath. And what we need to know, first of all, is that's normal. That's how our minds work. Our mind works much faster than we can imagine. And, they're finding out more and more. We can measure more and more how fast our minds work. So we can't keep up with that. So we first just learn to observe it without judging it. And then we can refine that, the way we work with our mind more and more. And when we've been able to kind of quieten our mind down a bit, then we can begin observing objects that pop up in our mind. It might be something that we think about, or it could be an idea or a concept, or something creative. And the thing that the mind does that I was reading about, someone gave it a name in something I read today, and they said the quality of the mind that we all have, and that is the most dangerous part, is that it's whenever we sit down to do something, when we're going to let our mind, we're not going to pay attention to our mind, like when we're going to meditate, the mind will be absolutely sure that now is the moment that I have to get up and wash the dishes. Or now is the moment I have to start writing my book, or the chapter in my book. Or right now is the moment that I have to do my shopping list. So the mind is programmed to it doesn't want to not be busy. It doesn't want to be not paid attention to. So most people will say, if I'm at home and I sit down to meditate, I get very distracted by everything, the dishes, the washing clothes, the dog barking. They think of everything else they need to be doing. And they'll say, but if I come to meditation, it's not like that. It's wonderful. I don't get distracted. Well, it's because you do get distracted. You can be sitting in this room and you're away from all your your home-like distractions. But we're distracted. You can think of all the things your mind wants to think about. And your mind will be thinking, I really should be home doing my shopping list, or I really should stop by the grocery store on the way home, or if I just stayed at home another hour instead of coming here, I would have gotten everything done on my to-do list for the day. So what am I doing here? That's what our minds do. Our minds do that. And it's a function of their survival. So when that happens, don't think it's because you can't meditate. And I always tell people the only reason if you come to, they always will say, oh, the Blue Lotus Temple is so wonderful and it's so peaceful and there's something magical about it. It's not magical at all. It is peaceful and lovely. But when you're sitting in a group of 30 other people, you're not going to get up and typically you're not going to get up and walk out of the room because you want to write your shopping list. And you're not close enough to home to go wash the dishes or go throw a load of laundry in. So when you're with a group of people, there are some social norms that keep us in our seats, which is a really good thing because we can learn about ourselves that way. Like, oh, I can meditate more easily here because those distractions aren't coming up, but also because I don't want people to think I'm weird if I start writing the chapter in my book, while I'm sitting on the cushion. So all of this is grist for the mill. So all of this stuff that we see about our resistance or the difficulties we have with our meditation, all of that is stuff that we can use in our meditation. That's what we work with. And that's why everything is contained in the body and the mind and the other feelings. And we work with the mind by watching. So we become the observer. We get behind, we try to step back and just watch what we're seeing going by. So we can see ourselves as an observer of any object that comes into our mind. And that's what we'll be working with more on Saturday because we'll have time to meditate and do it in lots of different forms. So it's almost 8 o'clock. So then I'll just mention, then the fourth foundation in mindfulness is called mental formations. And I used to get the two mixed up. I think, well, mental formations must be my thoughts, right? But the third foundation of consciousness, that's our thinking and all of our ideas and our concepts and our imagination. And mental formation, then, that fourth one is more, it's kind of everything all together because it includes the three, but it includes everything else in the universe, everything that can possibly be an object or something that we see as an object. So a certain idea can be an object, or a viewpoint can be an object. We can learn how to look at and see our viewpoints about things and begin to breathe into those things and start to loosen the tightness, the way it's more about loosening our grip on having viewpoints, having beliefs, having things be more rigid. And it's about looking at it and breathing into it and loosening our grip. And then there's more space around it. So we can have a certain viewpoint on something, and it can be based on what we've read and how we feel in our hearts and what our life experience has told us. And what our families have how we've been raised. But if we can loosen our grip on that viewpoint, then we can begin to have conversation with other people, because then we're not afraid of losing something that we're craving, because we don't have a hard grip on it. So we can begin to hear other viewpoints and begin to understand other points of view, and that's what we're always trying to do, is to be less rigid and more open, and not feel that, because nothing is permanent. All of these things kind of ebb and flow, just like our breath. So we're always looking at that through all these levels.
You can sit down, it's all right.
It is understood that Buddhism is not a religion, but it's a system. And this system is to get illumination based on your ethical character.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a beautiful thing. It's light and progress. How did the Buddha deal, or what was his thinking about the darkness aspect of the human being?
The what aspects?
The dark
The
aspect?
dark?
Was there a...
That's a good question. We always talk about Mara in Buddhism, and Mara was could take the image, or a visual image of being a demon, and Mara would try to tempt him. When he became enlightened, Mara came and sent beautiful dancing girls to entice him and drag him, keep him away from his meditation, and he didn't pay attention to it. But it's very clear that he's using Mara as just an image, and it represents the defilements in our own minds, and that's what we're purifying all the time. So there's not an outside source of evil. It's all about us.
I'm curious what your thinking is about teaching mindfulness in schools. We've seen that as a trend lately, whether it be yoga or some Tai Chi or just meditation. I'm curious what your thinking is.
Well, my viewpoint on that is changing a lot. So it's one of those areas where I've actually been able to put some space around my original viewpoint. And originally I thought, well, if you don't have all these other teachings like the living a moral life and all this other stuff, it's not going to support that mindfulness practice. But I really see now there's a lot of value, because what it's reaffirming is the value of quiet time and stillness. And I think that it's very valuable. And I think when it's taught properly, and that's from someone who really is skillful at what they're doing, they're not really teaching kids to sit and meditate as much as they are teaching them to be in the present moment with activities. And the kids are also, usually children and teenagers they respond very powerfully, very well to the idea of being quiet and being still. And we have Buddha kids at our temple, and they're 3- and 4-year-olds. They love to meditate. Well, it may be, for some kids, it might be 30 seconds or a minute, but they love to get into their poses, and they all come in knowing how to meditate. They all cross their legs and they do their fingers like this, and they sit. We have these big cushions that look like lotus leaves, and they go Om, because they've seen it on commercials and cartoons and anime and stuff. And then they just gradually learn that what they're doing is just letting themselves be quiet and still. And then they begin to learn about listening to sounds, and so they gradually have their time increase. And so I think there's a real need for that in the schools, because usually they're so chaotic, and my 2 kids are too old to have had that in school, but they're very different personalities, but they both, I could see, would have benefited from it. And one with resistance and the other one would have been jumped at the opportunity to try it. But it would have been good for both of their temperaments. And if it's yoga or Tai Chi or something where there's more gentleness, I think it's also a good bridge to teaching kids to cooperate with each other and find other ways than hitting each other or getting frustrated and, working out with aggression. So yeah, I feel good about it now. And before I was a little bit too much attached to, and I think Ajahn Brahm says this in one of his audio tapes. He was talking about seeing mindfulness being taught in schools. And he said, of course that belonged to us first. Of course, and I thought, yeah, we still have a little ego about it. All of us do. Like, well, if you really want to know how to do it right, you'd find a Buddhist monk and do it. But of course, a Buddhist monk is not who a lot of schools will not want a Buddhist monk to come in, right? So it's good to have lay people who are trained to teach. And they teach it in a different way, so it's very appropriate for the secular world. So, because we're always telling people, you come to meditate not because you want to be a Buddhist, and it's not a religion, so people don't have to join anything. And of course, I've joined something because I chose to be a monastic, so it seems a little ironic for me to say that, but meditation is something that can actually be learned and be taught without having religious overtones or Buddhist. If I teach it, it's going to be with Buddhist overtones, but it doesn't mean that that you won't get the benefits of it if you're not a Buddhist, whatever being a Buddhist means. I think you just decide that.
There's a version of mindfulness that is being taught in schools, and I'd made proposals to DuPage County, which didn't really go very far, but the technique that really somebody taught me, and that works great with kids, is a flavor of teaching mindfulness. Is I say, if there's too much chaos going on, you say two words. You say dot, which is like a dot, and then BE. So you say dot B. So dot stands for drop everything, and B stands for breathing. So the kids really take to that. They say, okay, we play this game called dot B. So dot means stop whatever you're doing, and then B means breathe.
That's good.
That works very well with children.
It does. I have a friend who is retired now, and so she substitute teaches a lot. And she has a practice that they use that's similar to that. And then if things get chaotic, and these are middle school kids, and they just drop everything and they sit quietly. And she knows kids from other years that know about her doing that. And the last time she was at a school, the kids love it when they do that. And then one child said, "Where's that bowl you used to bring and ring?" So they remembered that she had a little Tibetan bowl, and she would make a sound. And that child remembered that and wanted her to bring that bowl back. So yeah, they like it.
You talk about thoughts and how you're supposed to kind of like let them pass while meditating. What about visions? If you have visions and your mind, as kind of like monkey mind, wants to catch on to it and interpret it and think, oh, this is what I see. How do you kind of still keep your concentration with that?
Well, you treat them, they are just another form of a thought. And our imagination is a bunch of thoughts. So concepts are thoughts. So you can just let those pass through your mind too. And that you might get tempted to really stop and want to hold on to that because you want to look, oh, what does this mean? And what is this saying to me? And so try to just observe it and let it pass. And don't be tempted to say, well, this is so important, I just have to stop here. And because that's what our mind wants us to do, is stop. So it'll give you something juicy enough that you want to think, oh, this is so important, I'm going to stop. And what you do is stop your meditation then, because you stop and evaluate and critique, and it sidetracks you just like a thought does. That's a good question. I had a friend, when we first started meditating, we were doing it together in the Tibetan tradition, and we got to go and talk to the teacher during a retreat. And she told me at lunch, she said, I'm so excited to go talk to the teacher because I've been having these incredible visual visions in my head. I'm seeing colors and so she was so excited. So she went, when it was her turn to go, she went and told the teacher, and the teacher just nodded and said, and she told some of the visions she had had, and the teacher just said, well, those will pass. So she came out totally, and my friend's an artist, so that visual things with color and visual things were really important. So I thought that was a wonderful teacher who just said to her, well, it'll pass, don't worry about it.
Well, more than a question, thank you. First of all, and I want to share with all of you that I am teaching a mindfulness for kids for first, second, third, and fourth grade.
Wonderful.
And the very, very underserved kids that they are after school. And it's incredible how they are changing their lives. And I am learning from them. It's incredible how they are trying to survive in this world.
Yes.
And they need somebody that help them. Then I am doing that, and I am so happy.
Oh, that's
and I am so
wonderful.
excited that
And
you are here.
Do you meditate with them, or do you do exercises to help them?
Exercise, more than that.
Uh-huh.
I start teaching yoga first, then I add mindfulness in the basic ways, but they are learning how to relax, and because we talk about feelings. Mm-hmm. My background is I am psychology in my other country, but they are learning how to release all the fears, and they start concentrating themselves, and I teach them that they are water and they can go any place, because if you are water, you go any place that you want.
That's wonderful.
And even they live in a very, very destructive, because this is the word, I'm sorry, but very destructive society and families, they are surviving, and that is a very good tool.
That's wonderful. You're giving them tools that they can use all their lives, but it can help them survive. And there's a lot of fear. Mm-hmm. If in a lot of the country right now, there's a lot of fear in children, because if they're worried their parents may be, they may come home from school one day and their parents are gone. It's a terrible thing for a child to have to deal with, and they're seeing fear in their parents. Mindfulness is just wonderful, just to help them relax. Their poor little bodies are probably so tense all the time. That's wonderful that you're doing that. And we're grown-ups, we're all the same way, right? Our poor little bodies are so tense.